Hi, my name is Karen Fabian and I'm the founder of Bare Bones Yoga, and I want to welcome you to video number 2, part of my free online training called the Bare Bones Yoga Learn Anatomy Challenge. And I want to start out just addressing the challenge part of this because someone asked me yesterday after watching video number 1, and if you missed that one, you can just go back here on my YouTube channel and watch that one first. They said to me, you know, Karen, I love the video. It was really, really good, but I don't get the challenge part. What's the challenge? And I guess I want to address that, definitely, because I can appreciate that there might be some confusion there. Usually challenges that you hear about or see on social media have to do with things like maybe it's a fitness challenge or a nutrition challenge, you know, cut out sugar for 30 days and I'll support you through that process, or a fitness-based challenge where you need to do certain, you know, things from a strength building perspective, and maybe it kind of builds over a period of 30 days. So in my mind, the challenge here really lies in really 2 pieces. So the first thing is, if you're a newer yoga teacher, maybe what you're thinking is, I definitely want to bring more anatomy-based cues and bring more anatomy knowledge into my teaching, but I just don't know how to do it, and I'm feeling completely overwhelmed. And it was never something I really understood when I was going through school or maybe in my initial training. I just don't get it. And so for that person, the challenge is really going to be, how can I put those feelings aside and go into this challenge with an open mind and learn what I can and then do what I need to do to get additional knowledge so that I really can start to share this information in a confident and clear way. And the good news is, this challenge is the front end of a whole process and system that I have for you. And part of what I'm doing in this challenge is sharing with you what those other resources are that I've built that can help you then take this and build on this knowledge by taking advantage of these other 2 things. The second thing is, if you're someone who's been teaching for a while and maybe you dabble in sharing anatomy with your class and maybe it's not really your vibe, or maybe it's just really not something that you ever really got a good handle on, or maybe you do feel like you have a good handle on it. So the challenge for that person is, how can you go into this and keep an open mind and see, is there something new to learn here? You know, if you are watching this and you're already feeling pretty good about your anatomy knowledge, maybe you'll watch it and it'll just kind of confirm what you already know. But I can certainly say for myself, there are a lot of teachers out there that I connect with and that I follow on social media, and I watch their videos, and I always try to keep an open mind. I didn't always do that, but I always try to keep an open mind and see, is there something in this that I can take away that I can use in my teaching, in my classes? Is there something that can help me build my understanding? So I would say those are 2 challenges. It might be the challenge of kind of facing your fear of understanding anatomy, and it could be the challenge of keeping an open mind if you kind of feel like you already have a good handle on it, and seeing if there's something new here for you to learn. So now that we've talked about that, I want to talk to you about what we're going to cover here in video number 2. And I've got my anatomy manual handy here. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a sec. But I want to give you a sense of what the topic is for today's video. So today's video has to do with this idea that anatomy is such a big subject. How can we break it down into digestible pieces so that we can start to get a handle on it? And this is really important because if we just look at anatomy from a high-level view, it's really hard to know for yoga teachers, what are the pieces that we need to understand? I mean, we're not doing surgery on people, right? That's obvious. But even when you start to think about different movement professionals, whether they're Pilates teachers or certified personal trainers, I have that background as well. You know, you may go to the gym and you may look and see the personal trainers working with students, and you may think, God, I wonder, you know, what knowledge and background they have that I don't have as a yoga teacher. What are they doing with people that I'm not doing? So part of what we're trying to do here, and what I want to do for you right out of the gate, is break down what are the pieces of anatomy that I believe are really helpful for teachers to really understand. And then there's another whole section of things that are kind of nice to haves. And I know when I did my certified personal training test and I did all this studying leading up to taking that test, there was a whole slew of additional information about biology and chemistry and just biological processes and cell structure and muscle fiber structure and a lot of different things that as yoga teachers we really don't need to know, right? We're talking about gross motor movements in yoga. We're not talking about, if you're trying to look at it from the perspective of the critical things I need to know, not necessary that we really understand how cellular structure impacts things or even muscle fibers. Again, that's a little bit on the line. But again, I hope you kind of get the idea that there's a certain kind of depth you want to go to as a yoga teacher, and going deeper than that is kind of a nice to have. And let's face it, when you're a newer teacher or when you're feeling like your information around this topic is kind of lacking, it's completely overwhelming if you're going to just take a book and open it up and try to dive into the whole thing. So I've done that work for you, and in my anatomy manual, which I'm going to refer to here, and in my online course, which I'm going to refer you to, again, this is how you get that additional piece to support this free training, I break it down for you. So I'm going to tell you today what these pieces are in this overall topic that I really think that you should get a good handle on. If you haven't downloaded the free PDF guide, please do that. I'm going to attach it as a link to this video here. So let's talk a little bit about what those components are. So I talked yesterday about this idea of why understand anatomy in the first place. What are some of the reasons why it's helpful for teachers to understand anatomy themselves? And so go back and take a look at that video. I didn't go over everything, but I did go over some of the reasons that I believe it's helpful for teachers to get anatomy and really understand it. So the next piece is, what are the key aspects of anatomy? So I'm going to actually turn, this is my 200-page anatomy guide, and I built this specifically because I couldn't find one book that had all the key pieces that I wanted to teach when I teach yoga teachers anatomy in their 200-hour training, so I created my own manual. So these key aspects of anatomy, let me actually go to page 13. So this is how we break it down. The first thing is major movements of the body. So I'm going to tell you about two of them and describe it in an anatomical way. So when we look at the movements of flexion and extension, so here I am flexing the shoulder and extending the shoulder. This movement happens in the sagittal plane. And the sagittal plane divides the body into a left and a right side. You can have one down the midline and then you can have them in different parts, but they always, this plane always runs in this same direction. And so the movement that occurs in this plane is this front to back movement, or what we call flexion and extension. And so here we're flexing the hip and then we're moving it back, extending the hip. So in the actual human body, this is shoulder flexion and this is shoulder extension, flexion of the hip, extension of the hip, flexion of the knee, extension of the knee. And so the movement of flexion and extension always occurs around a joint, right? You can't move a bone in the middle. It has to move at the point of articulation between it and another bone. And that is what is called a joint. And so flexion and extension are the movements, and the plane in which the movement occurs is the sagittal plane. And there are other planes of movement, and there are plenty of other movements themselves. And it's really important for teachers to understand what those movements are and what the planes are in which they occur. And why is that important? Well, think about if you are a teacher, which I'm assuming most of you watching this are, how many times do you ask people to lift their leg and flex their foot? And you look around and you see all sorts of variations. Or coming into airplane, you might say point your toes, or coming into up dog, point your toes. And people don't always really get things that you may think as a teacher they're going to get. And so it's really important for you to get it and for then you to be able to explain it in such a way that the people in your class understand it. So again, I'm just giving you here in these free videos just an excerpt from the online course and from the manual. So that's one of the things we want to understand, major movements of the body. The next thing is major bones of the body. So the body is comprised of 206 bones. There are 26 bones in the foot alone. And while it may be your passion to be able to name all 26 bones in the body, I don't really think that that's necessary for you to know, but you can be darn sure that you should know major bones of the body. So when I say major, it doesn't always necessarily mean big, right? Because what's this? This is your sternum. Not a very big bone, but certainly something that you want to know. And, so in the manual, in the online course, I go through, starting from head to toe, what are the major bones of the body? And these are things that you really should have a good comfort level in terms of knowing. Now I'm going to tell you right out of the gate, I don't go into every bone of the hand, and I don't go into every bone of the foot. Is that good to know? Maybe, but I don't think it's necessary right out of the gate. It's something you may learn over time. It's also something that you may research when you have a student who has a hand injury and you have a conversation with that person. And this is oftentimes how we start to build deeper knowledge. We have a reason to go look it up, and we start to then, get a better understanding of it. But major bones of the body is a big part of what you need to know, and I go through that in both the manual and the course. The next thing is major joints of the body. So I said earlier, joints are where the bones connect. So shoulder joint, that's a really obvious one. Hip joint, another really obvious. Elbow joint, right? But then we start to get into different joints of the back, of the spine. And you may look at it and think, let me just kind of think about a big one. But when you look at all the bones that create the spine, there are a lot of articulation points, and our articulation is where the bones connect. And so there are quite a few joints in the spine that are good to know and really understand what kind of joints they are. Another joint that gets talked about a lot in yoga is the SI joint, and that's the sacroiliac joint, and it's a connection between the sacrum and the part of the pelvis known as the ilium. And you can see, even though it looks a little bit different than something like the shoulder joint, right? It's a different kind of joint. It's still a connection, right? These bones are connected to this bone through something, not through magic, right? So that's the joint itself. But it's helpful to understand some of these major joints and the different shapes. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. So look at the hip joint compared to the knee joint. And what's something that you notice? Even if you knew nothing about anatomy, just look at the differences between how they look. Right? So we're talking about a circular type joint versus a hinge type joint. And so now let's think a little bit about, well, what are the implications of that for movement? Well, if I have a joint that's kind of shaped like a circle, I get a lot of really, big movements through that, and that's true when it comes to your hip. But when I have a joint that's, a hinge joint, I can move really well in this plane, but I can't do a lot of other things. But of course we know from yoga that we can move our leg this way, right, when we come into pigeon or other shapes. And so this joint is actually a little bit of a hybrid joint. It's a pivot joint in part because I can move the shin in or out, but it's mainly a hinge joint. And understanding this really has a bearing on how you teach in postures where you're asking people to move their hip and their knee. So if I'm asking somebody to come into standing pigeon and they just push from here, this joint is not built in such a way that it's going to open as easily as this joint, because this is a ball and socket and this is a hinge. So it'd be much more helpful for me to cue my students in a shape like this to open from their hip versus open from their knee. Here it's not that much of an issue because I'm standing up. But what if I'm close to the ground and I have people come down and they start to leverage the ground to try to get this open? Now I'm putting all sorts of pressure on my knee there. And again, that joint is just not built as well for opening. This one is. So this is where you can start to see, when you have this basis of knowledge around the fundamentals, you can start to take it into not only how you cue, but how you kind of bring up with students what are some actions that they may want to stay away from. And it doesn't mean you go around and you're saying, don't do that, but it means that you're starting to inform people around what is healthy movement for the long term. And as I talked about in video number 1, when we don't really get an anatomy as teachers, we can be throwing these cues out and we really don't have a good handle on what are the implications for these students if they continue to practice in this way for the long term. Does it mean that everybody's going to have some problem with their knee in this case? No. But wouldn't we rather as teachers kind of stay in kind of a middle lane around cueing and presenting sequences and the postures in such a way that for the most part, most people are going to be safe in the pose. So that's that piece. So major joints. Major muscles of the body. So just like we talked about bones, I wouldn't say that you need to know every muscle of the body, but again, there are going to be some really obvious ones that you're going to want to have a good handle on. I can remember many years ago, everybody always talked about the psoas. I got a lot of questions from students about the psoas. You know, I would say, where is the psoas? And they go, I don't know, but I think it's somewhere around here. So this is, again, what often happens is that people have kind of a general idea, but they don't really have a good idea or even a clear idea about a particular muscle, but they kind of hear it, or maybe a teacher said something about it, or maybe they saw something on social media. So this is where you can really fill in the gaps. But in order to do that, you need to know the knowledge and you need to own it as well. So psoas absolutely is one of those muscles. You know, I'm not going to go through all of them, but in the manual, in the online course, I go through what are the major muscles of the body that I think you need to have a good handle on. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to know every single muscle and its origin and insertion, but you should definitely know where the muscle is in the body and what does it do. Maybe you're going to look up the origin and insertion. I mean, something like the latissimus dorsi in the back of the body, it is a very broad muscle in the back. And it's hard to remember every single place that it originates. It inserts on the humerus, but the origin is really, really big, and there's a lot of different places that it connects to the bones. So that almost every time is something that I need to look up when I'm teaching to inform people about the origin of that muscle. But some other muscles, the origin's pretty clear. It's maybe one spot of the body and a lot easier to remember. So the next thing is a very good understanding of the structure, composition, and function of the spine. So you want to obviously know, how many bones are in the spine, how many bones are in the different parts of the spine, what's the shape of the different vertebra in the spine. You can just see that the vertebrae up here are a lot smaller than the ones down here. What are the different functions of them, and what happens to the different parts of the spine in human movement. So one of the things that comes up a lot is people worry about back issues when students fold down. And so this has a lot to do with having a good understanding of what's, kind of the structure of the spine itself and what's the piece that we're concerned about in a forward fold. So just really briefly, if you think about the bones and the discs between the bones, there's an inner part of that disc. You probably have even heard of this. Maybe you have a friend who had a slipped disc or a herniated disc. But again, we want to have a good understanding of, well, what does that really mean? Not so we can diagnose people, but that we can understand the implications to the disc in different movements that we make. And to some extent, having a conversation, the ability to have a conversation with a student, if they come up to you before class and they go, you know what, I have this issue with my back. Well, where is it? Well, it's in my lumbar spine. Okay, great. And what's the issue? Well, I have a little bit of disc sensitivity. I mean, these are the kinds of things that you should, to a certain extent, be able to have some kind of comfort level around conversing with students about it, and then talking to them about what are some of the limitations in movement that they notice they have because of this issue. Have they been cleared by their doctor to practice yoga, and on and on and on. And part of this manual is going into how to talk to your students when they have questions after class. So I go into all of that, not only here, but in the course as well. So that takes us through the structure and composition of the spine. So the next thing is, now you can kind of get a sense, we're kind of building the foundational blocks. So now we have a good sense of the anatomical movements and the joints and the bones and the muscles. Now we're ready to say, okay, let's look at those muscles in poses. right? Because what good does it do to know the muscles if we can't know how they show up in different postures? What's contracting, what's extending, what's isometrically contracting, what's the synergist, what's the agonist, right? So these are the things that you get a better handle of once you've built the basic knowledge. And so here in the manual and in the online course, the course has video, which is fabulous. I worked with a colleague and she was the student and I was the teacher, and I go through the poses and the muscles in them. And here in the manual, I have pictures of the poses, and in narrative form, go through for every single pose what is the primary action, the key muscles in action, joints in action, modifications, things to look for as a teacher, and speaking to mind, body, and spirit. So it gives you a full breakdown. And the reason that this is now the next step is because we built all this fundamental knowledge, so now we can apply it to the postures themselves. Okay, so then that brings us to understanding alignment that could put the body at risk. So this is part of what I talked about before with that conversation we had about the difference between the hip and the knee. And this is, again, a more higher level body of knowledge now that we've built our understanding of the fundamentals. So now we can start to look at, well, what are the implications for the shoulder when we're moving from high to low push-up? What muscles do we need to contract to protect the shoulder joint? Because now in high to low push-up, we're fighting gravity, we're on our hands, we have a tendency to internally rotate. You know now what internal rotation means, and you know what muscles create internal rotation. You know what muscles create the opposing movement, which is external rotation. You can start to cue people to those muscles because you know what they do. So this is, again, I really hope you're getting a sense of how really knowing this, it becomes part of your body of knowledge, and it informs what you say when you cue people. So it's not that you're just kind of up there parroting what you've heard from another teacher or from what you were taught without really understanding the underlying rationale for saying that. And this is one of my biggest bugaboos when it comes to looking at the traditional way that we're training teachers around anatomy. It's just kind of a listen to me, listen to me, listen to me, and then go practice it. And many times we're not giving teachers the reason why the cue is what it is from an anatomy standpoint. So if they get questioned by someone, they don't know how to answer it, they're not really speaking these cues from a basis of knowing the anatomy, they're just speaking these cues from the basis of hearing somebody else say it and assuming that person knows what they're talking about. And even if that person does, the cue alone on the topic of, or with the focus of alignment, is not enough. We need to really get what's going on underneath the skin. And then of course we can teach to alignment, but it's now informed alignment, right? Because we're saying things in such a way that we're not just saying stack the knee over the heel, we're asking people to center the knee. Why are we asking them to center the knee? You might even then add, if the knee dumps in, think about how that might strain the ligaments and some of the joint structure on the inside of the knee. And you don't have to get all complicated with people and try to razzle-dazzle them with your knowledge. I'm just talking about adding cues that not only say the thing, but sometimes you might want to sprinkle in there the reason why. Because, hello, you've got this audience there, you've got this group of people there. They're presumably there to learn healthy movement. Why not give them more than the alignment? But to do that, you need to know what the anatomy is and confidently and clearly be able to express it. And that's what this free training, what the manual, what my online course is all about. Okay, so we've gone through that, and that really takes us through the key pieces that are helpful to know and a way to kind of get your arms around this entire subject of anatomy. So in the last 2 minutes here, I want to kind of pull this all together. So you have the PDF guide. I hope you've downloaded that. I've given you a sense at the beginning. We talked a little bit about why this is a challenge, right? So maybe you fall into one of those categories of people that I talked about. I've mentioned throughout this video here some additional resources that you can access to build your knowledge beyond what I'm sharing here. Because this is not the kind of thing where I can teach everything in this free training. You probably wouldn't watch the whole video anyway. So I'm giving you nuggets, right? So if you want to learn more, you can purchase the manual for $65 on my website, barebonesyoga.com. If you want to and prefer to learn through an online course format, which is video, right, text and video, you can purchase my online course called Your Yoga Anatomy Blueprint. And right in the PDF, you have links to both of those resources. So those are two things that I'd highly encourage you to take advantage of to start to build your knowledge beyond what you're going to get here in this free training. The other thing you can do, which is a little bit of just kind of a quick thing, is you can download my online classes. I have 3 of them on the website. The link is again right on the PDF. They're $10 a piece, and I go through anatomically based cueing in each one. So it's a great way to practice at home while learning, and between moving on your mat and hearing the cues, it's a good way to start to really understand the information. So we've gone through video number 2. There are 9 videos to go. I was only going to do 1 a week, but then I thought, this is going to take 9 weeks. That is way too long. I want to get this information out as soon as possible to you. So I'm going to really try to pick up the pace and do 2 or 3 videos a week so we're done a lot sooner. So if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email, Karen@barebonesyoga.com. The other thing you can do is just comment right here on the video, and that's a great way to add your thoughts, any questions you have. I'm happy to answer any questions, of course, and I'd love, just in general, to hear from you and to hear what you think. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you're enjoying this, and namaste.